everyone. I hope you can hear me. My screen's going a little bit crazy, so I'm going to switch it off in a second, but I'll do a very brief introduction first of all. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this joint event with SLG and YLG Scotland. It's great to finally be teaming up to bring you some CPD. We have a real treat in store for you tonight, and it's a great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Maisie Chan. Maisie is a British-Chinese children's author based in Glasgow, whose debut novel, Danny Chung Does Not Do Maths, won the Jalek Children's and YA Prize in 2022, and was also shortlisted for the Blue Peter Book Awards and the Diverse Book Awards. It also appeared in many school library reading lists, including South Ayrshire's Read Woke collection and North Lanarkshire's Read to Succeed programme. Her latest novel, Keep Dancing, Lizzie Chu, tells the heartwarming story of strictly loving Lizzie and her grandfather as they embark on a road trip to the Blackpool Tower Ballroom. It was recently Scottish Book Trust's Book of the Month for December, where I won a copy that I've just finished, and it really is an excellent read if you haven't already read it. Tonight, Maisie is going to speak about her relationship with libraries and the difference libraries have made to her life and career. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end, so please type any questions you have into the chat and Gillian will pick them up. Please keep yourself on mute so we can clearly hear Maisie, but do switch your camera on if you wish, and if it's not going crazy like mine. It's lovely to be able to see everyone. So without further ado, please give a very warm welcome to Maisie Chan.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming after work. I know probably you're quite tired. And I am in Glasgow, but I am from Birmingham, as you can tell from my accent. So I've been in Glasgow nearly 6 years, it'll be 6 years this August. And I was thinking to myself, oh, I haven't picked up any Glaswegian, or I don't really use the word we either for small, because where I'm from in Birmingham, having a wee was like going to the toilet, so I don't really use it for small. But then the other month, a few months ago, I realised that I have picked up some Glaswegian sort of, not dialect, but just kind of some sounds. And I have a French bulldog, and I was saying to her, eat your food. And I was like, oh gosh, I picked up some sort of Glaswegian kind of shorter vowels, it sounds like. So I think my accent's slightly changing, and I'm only just noticing now. But it's so great living in Glasgow, and it's been brilliant being a children's author in Scotland. I've been a writer for a very long time, even though my debut, Danny Chung, came out in 2021. I started writing in 2006. So I'm going to start even before that and talk about my relationship with libraries and how it's helped me become an author, to be honest. So I'm going to start at sort of the beginning, when I was 8. So I've got a book here called My Class Goes to the Library. It's a non-fiction book by Franklin Watts, who is still going. They're part of Pache now. And I am in this book. I am not the main star, but I am in the book. And this is my library that I used to go to. So this is Tiverton School in Selly Oak in Birmingham. And they were chosen for this book. And it followed Angela Verma, who was my mum's. My mum was a childminder and a foster carer, and she adopted me, but she used to foster childmind Angela Vernon, who's there. So it's still got the stamp in it. Selly Oak Library gave me this book. She was a year below me, and I should have actually been in her class, but my teacher put me up, so I was actually put up a year. But you can see it was quite a diverse upbringing that I had in Birmingham. So I lived about 3 miles out of the city centre. So there I am, that's me and my mum. I'm the taller girl. My mum, Jean, is there, and that's Angela and Angela's brother. And my mum, Jean, would take Angela to school and then look after her brother. And my mum was the one that really introduced me to libraries. So we lived in a council house. My dad was a cleaner at Cadbury's. He used to clean the machine, and my mum was a foster carer. And they didn't buy books at all, really. They might have had some from a jumble sale, And I remember having this copy of Cinderella. It was a Ladybird copy, these old, very quite thin copies. And I used to read that over and over and over again. But it was going to the library with my mum that started my kind of love and my journey with books and stories. I'm going to show you, I'm going to find a picture of the library so you can see what it looked like. And it was built in 1905. So if you can see that. So it says free library over the top, and it was 1905, and it was a kind of red brick, and it matched the school that I went to. And here you can see the counter. That's the librarian in the counter. So that counter was like a U shape. So you would go in one side, but you would check your books out on the other side. And my memories of the library were just so, I've just got such fond memories. There was a whole section, a whole room that was for children. And I remember just running in there and having these 4 tickets that were paper. So they were kind of cardboard, little wallets almost, that you would, each book had a little paper slip in it. And if you checked that out, they would put that slip into your ticket. And that whole process was just magical, and you could only take 4 books. But I just love the smell of the library, the wood. They would have loads of pictures that our school would draw, and they would put them on the walls. And I remember winning an art competition when I was 6, and they put my Red Riding Hood up in Selly Oak Library. And I remember just feeling very proud of myself. And I think that's the first memory where I'm like, wow, I've created something, and it's up on the wall, and people they've judged it. I've won a prize. I've won £5. So that library was very special to me, and it was literally, I don't know, less than 10 minutes from my house. And sadly, it's closed. But I did visit there in 2009 before it closed, and did a little author event, which was really nice. So I got to go there as an author as well as a reader as well. So school libraries have also been very influential in my journey. At secondary school, so I went to a school called Dame Elizabeth Cadbury School, and as the name kind of sounds, it was next to Cadbury's, the chocolate factory. So sometimes you could smell chocolate in the air when you left school. Our uniforms were brown like chocolate bars, and unfortunately so was the PE kit, and we had these horrible brown dim knickers and brown little skirts for PE. But I'm just so glad that girls don't have to put on those horrible knickers and skirts. And my dad worked there at Cadbury's. So there was this kind of relationship with Cadbury's, Bourneville, and the school. And for about 2 or 3 years, my form tutor, Mrs. Rogers, was the librarian as well. So she taught sociology, but also was the librarian. And so every day I would actually be in the library, because that was my form, and we had our register taken there. And my memories of being in that library was just, it felt like a library was the haven. So if it was raining, or I didn't have anyone to hang out with, or if I just felt like I just wanted to be alone, the school library was where I would go. And I kind of had a weird, lots of people ask me what I read as a young person. And to be honest, I don't remember that much. I was kind of there in the early 90s, late 80s. I remember reading Judy Blume. The Outsiders was a favourite book of mine. I think I read more sort of fantasy then as well. I don't remember any titles, but I remember there was one book, and it had it had an orange person on the cover. I remember that. But I used to love reading cookbooks in the library. I don't know why. I would just sit there and look at food. I don't know, during lunch times. That was really fond memory as well. And English teachers. I had the best English teachers at my school. One of them I'm still sort of in touch with, Mrs. Selwood. And Mrs. Selwood would take us to go and see plays at the Royal Shakespeare Company. They would push you, but also be kind. And I just felt like the English teachers and Mrs. Rogers were like the best teachers at school. And those are the people that nurtured me and gave me confidence. I wasn't very confident. I was a very shy child and very shy teenager, even until I went to uni. And after I went to uni, I was very shy. So it's funny now that I speak to hundreds of kids, or I'll do Zoom, or I'm in front of the camera all the time, because back then I was quite an introvert, didn't really want to be in the spotlight. Never would have thought I could be an author in a million years. It never crossed my mind once, actually. So it is quite funny when I hear lots of children's authors say in their talks that they used to write novels when they were 8, or that they always wanted to be a children's author, because that wasn't my experience. And I think it's having those role models. I think having no one that was British Chinese, not having characters or people on TV that look like you, it kind of made you feel that you couldn't do those things, or those spaces weren't for you. And so I didn't think about being an author at all, like until my late 20s. So I thought maybe I could be a librarian, and I've worked in a couple of libraries, a teacher maybe. I like working with children. I've worked in the charity sector and retail. I've had so many different jobs, call centre jobs. I've been a cleaner. And I think actually those jobs give me experience, but also I feel like I know people quite well, different types of people, and that helps with creating characters. And so even though I didn't have a clear path to becoming an author, all of those jobs and my experiences help me when I write, because I feel like I know people very well. And I'll tell you my path now into becoming an author. So my journey was a bit kind of funny. I did American studies at Birmingham University because I liked American things, which is a really silly reason, but I liked American music, basketball, film, the culture. I think it's because I used to see it on TV all the time. And I really wanted to go and live in America. And I didn't know how to do that other than doing this degree, American studies, because the third year you get to spend in America. And so I applied and got in. So I got a place at Birmingham University, which is literally 5 minutes from my house. And my mum was very happy for me to stay at home. And so it was brilliant because it was literature, American literature plus American history were the main 2 strands. So for 4 years, I studied American literature and history, and then film studies and gender studies and historical geography. So it was a really great degree because we did all these different things, African American studies. And the third year I went to UC Berkeley, which is one of the top universities in America, on its exchange program. And when I was over there, that experience also contributed to me becoming an author, which I didn't know at the time. So I did lots of Asian American courses, learned about how Asians had migrated to America, read Asian American literature, Maxine Hong Kingston. I studied history, gender, but with a, as it pertains to Asian Americans. And even though I was British, I just felt like, oh, they're learning about their own history and diaspora. Why, when I got back to England, I was just like, why is there nothing here? Why are there no books being written about British Chinese people? Not even, there wasn't even much non-fiction around. There was nothing. And it felt that the community was quite apathetic. They didn't really push their children or want them to be artists or creative. I think that's kind of changed now. There's quite a lot of people that I know in the creative industries, but back then, there weren't people on TV. I mean, I think Hollyoaks just got their first British Chinese family last year, not in EastEnders, no presenters. And so that whole void of not seeing myself or British Chinese culture or anyone that looked like, not even in small roles, I think that had quite a profound effect on me, and was one of the reasons that I wanted to become an author. So during my year abroad at Berkeley, I just discovered lots of Asian American history, but also looked at myself and thought, why don't I know stuff about my own culture or history, or how people moved from China to Britain. And so that year really lit a fire under me. Then I did a master's. So I went back home, did a master's in American film and literature. So for my BA, I studied The Toilet Club, which is one of my favourite books by Maisie Chan, and it made me cry, and I just loved the mother and daughter relationship. But it was one of the first books with Asian American women, Chinese women that were westernized, but kind of linked to the history and where they'd come from. And I studied the film version as well with Wayne Wang. And then the next year after that, once I'd finished my degree, I researched Asian Chinese men in Hollywood. So at that time, Jackie Chan, Jet Li, and Chow Yun-fat were very popular in Hollywood. So I read quite a lot of critical race theory, read lots about Asian masculinity, and also Asian stereotypes for women as well. I looked at kind of gender as it pertains to representation. I didn't know any of those things would then help me now as an author. I feel like, you know, I didn't know, I was just interested in that stuff. And so when I look back, I'm like, there was a path, I just couldn't really see it. And then after that master's, I was kind of a young carer for my parents, which is what Lizzie Chu's about. So I've got Lizzie Chu here. So I often do use my own experiences in my books and create fiction from them. So she's not me, but she's kind of inspired by myself. And so my dad, Ron, had dementia after my mum passed away. So that's kind of what happens with Lizzie Chu, like her grandma passes away and then she has to look after her granddad. And it was about this one day, the book's about one day with her granddad. And I had this one great day with my dad where I took him to Dublin because he lived in it and he'd never been on a plane. He was like 75, he'd never been on a plane. And that day he just felt like a young boy that, you know, I was treating him. And so that was what I wanted to capture when I wrote Lizzie Chu. So yeah, so after my mum passed away, so it's quite a long story, I decided, somebody asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, I want to write books. And I don't know where that came from, but I feel like it's kind of this epiphany that happened after my mum passed away. And I thought about it for 2 years and did nothing about it whatsoever because I was too scared, to be honest. So I just told friends, I really want to become a writer, but I don't know how to do it. And then one day, a friend I worked with at Blockbuster, so I worked at Blockbusters on and off for quite a long time, he sent me a competition from Birmingham Library, so the Central Library in Birmingham and the whole library team. And it was Writers of Colour in Birmingham. You would get a mentor for 6 months. The mentor would help you write a short story and then the short story would be published. And that story was published in 2008 in Original Skid. And it was called Lie, Cheese and Bingo Balls. And it was about a student who's just graduated. So she was 22 and she's at home and her grandma comes from China to stay at her house. She's moved in. And so Lie, Cheese and Bingo Balls was actually the inspiration. It was kind of the first idea for Danny Chung to not do maths. So that idea from 2008 then became a novel for children, which I started writing 10 years later in 2018. And so if you are a writer as well as a librarian, I would just say, don't throw anything away, like keep those ideas because they might come back around again. And that's happened both with Lizzie Chu and Danny Chung, where these ideas and experiences from the past have come back around and I've used them for my novels. And so it was a librarian and she was called Sue and she used to work at the Children's Library in central Birmingham. And she read my book, my story, Lie, Cheese and Bingo Balls, and she said to me, your voice would suit writing for young people. And nobody had ever said that to me before because I'd written some short stories for adults. And so thank you, Sue, wherever you are. I think she retired, but she just planted the seed that maybe I could write for children. It hadn't really been, you know, something that I thought about before, but when she said it, I was like, oh, okay, I like children, maybe I could write for them. And then life got in the way. So I had a few things published. I did actually have a couple of kids' books published in 2009. These were with Franklin Watts. And that was funny because that My Class Goes to the Library book that I showed you earlier was published by Franklin Watts. And these were for the school library market. Reluctant readers. So these are set on estates. And I was given a brief and then wrote to that brief. And that was my first foray into being published. But even after these, I still wasn't sure I was a children's author. I was just like, I just want to write books, really. And then I had kids. So from 2010 until sort of 2015, I was a stay-at-home mum. I kind of didn't write anymore. And I felt very angry about that. I was quite resentful that I was like losing myself as a new mum. And then I got onto Room 204, which is Writing West Midlands kind of professional development scheme. And it just gave me confidence to get back into it, start writing again, the network. And I got on to the Creative Futures Literary Award. So I was highly commended And from there, my confidence started to grow again. And I got onto Megaphone the year after, which is when I became a children's author. So that was with Lila Rashid. So on that cohort with Danielle Duando. So if you haven't read her books, I recommend her books like When Our Worlds Collide. I've just read it and it's brilliant. She's so authentic and she's just a brilliant writer. And also Joyce Effiahama, who has just got a book deal. It's coming out this year. I don't know what the title is, but her agent's Lydia Silver. So it's taken her a few years to be on Megaphone with me and Danielle and to get her book deal. So it takes a really long time. And then after Megaphone, I got my agent. No, after Megaphone, I moved actually to Scotland. And I'd written a teen novel called Looking for Lily Wong on Megaphone. I'd signed with my agent, but when I was editing the novel, it just didn't feel like it was working. And my agent asked me if I had something else. And I said, I've got this idea about a grandma that plays bingo. And she loved it. And that was Danny Chung's Not Do Maths. And so my journey to being a writer has been really, really long. I've written short stories for adults. I've written screenplays that didn't really go anywhere. I've written educational books. And then 2 years ago, when Danny Chung came out, that's when my career sort of exploded. I didn't expect anyone to read Danny Chung Does Not Do Maths because I only had one offer, one book deal offer in the UK. Most of the other publishers didn't want it. And thankfully, Piccadilly Press and my editor loved it. So I'm so grateful to them for picking it up. And just the success of it has been phenomenal. And I think that's because, first of all, it was a new kind of book for middle grade, you know, with a British Chinese family, British Chinese boy on the cover. So if you haven't seen the cover, it's this one. There's Danny. I think the humour and that it's about family, but also it's very relatable. I was listening to my 8-year-old son come home from school and trying to put bits of him into Danny. What was he interested in? What did he find relevant? And put those bits of him into Danny Chung. And I think lots of teachers, they think, when they read it, they're like, I've got pupils in the class that are similar to this child that doesn't like maths, but they like to draw. And it's got drawing and maths in it. And so for schools, it's such a good book. But I still didn't think anyone would read it. Even when I got the book deal, I was like, no one's going to read this book because there hasn't really been anything like this before. So I was quite nervous, to be honest. And when it won the Jalak Prize and the Brantford Bows last year, I couldn't believe it because I've been following those two awards, you know, for a few years, and just couldn't believe it. You know, when I saw the shortlist, I was like, there's no way I'm going to win over these other authors. And when it did, it was very emotional, to be honest. I don't know if you saw the Jalak award ceremony, but I was just like sobbing, not very composed. And then it's just been brilliant. You know, Keep Dancing Lizzie Chu, I think it's doing quite well, not as well as Danny. I think I've had some feedback actually the last 2 weeks from the Juniper Awards, so it's the School Library Awards down south. And some of the pupils that are girls, they said the cover's a bit too girly. I really like the cover, and I didn't think it was girly, but they just said, I think it looks like it's about a girl that wants to dance, and it kind of put them off. But when they actually read it, they were like, oh, it's got carers in it, and it's got dementia, and it's road trip and dressing her. So I think, I don't know, some of them didn't like the cover, and maybe that's put some people off. But I didn't. When you're an author, sometimes you don't have much say over the cover. But the glitter ball actually was my idea. I can't put that on my publishers. I was like, can I have a big glitter ball with Lizzie on top? And that's what I did. So I really liked it. It's a bit like Miley Cyrus when she's on top of that wrecking ball in her video. And then 2 years ago, I was in the Very Merry Murder Club. So I couldn't believe it when Robin Stevens and Serena Patel. So they wrote every author a letter and they invited us to be part of it. And I was like, yes, you know, sometimes when you get some opportunity to like, no, and then sometimes it's like, yes. And I wanted to do something in my style with that kind of humorous family kind of dynamic. And so I've written a story in here called It Takes a Thief to Catch a Thief. And it's about a cat burglar. And I used to love Alfred Hitchcock and Agatha Christie. And so I actually feel like I didn't read that much YA or teen books when I was a kid. I kind of went from reading younger fiction to reading like Judy Blume, and then going to Agatha Christie and Dilly Cooper and romance books for women that you're not really supposed to read as a teenager. I remember reading, like, was it Lace? There was a series called Lace. I read the book, and there were some other romance books, Peaches or something. I read those. So I'm so happy now that teenagers have got books for teenagers, and that publishers and writers are like thinking about young people, because I think when I was a kid, it was like they felt like a big gap, and I wasn't really catered for, it felt like. So I think that's enough of me talking. So if you've got any questions, you can just put them in the chat and I'll have a look and see what we've got. Or Kirsten, if you've seen any and you want to just tell me them, I can have a look.
I think it's mostly me just being very excited by everything you're sharing, Maisie. Thank you so much. It's so fascinating, and I love the way that libraries are this kind of common thread throughout your journey as a reader and a writer. That was absolutely such a beautiful journey in every sense to learn about. I actually, just while people are thinking of their questions, I had a quick one, and you sort of touched on it there, that representation is improving in children's and young adult fiction. Is that something you see with your own kids? Are they seeing themselves on the page in the way that kind of you were looking for and actually almost had to write because there was such a gap there?
I think so. So my kids are both mixed race, and I think there are actually loads of kids that are multiple heritage, and I think there should be more characters like that. So that's why in Lizzie Chu, I wanted a British, Vietnamese and Welsh character. So Chi is half Vietnamese and she's half Welsh. And Tyler's got 2 dads. So every time I write a novel, I try and put other different types of representation in as well. So I think, yeah, they can see themselves, you know, Tiger Warrior. So I've got a younger series called Tiger Warrior. And actually I was a librarian, a school librarian told me not to tell. When I go to do secondary schools, he said, don't say it's for younger fiction, because lots of her students wanted to read it. So these are about Jack, who's mixed race, and so it's for fans of Beast Quest, to be honest. Very simple vocabulary, lots of illustrations, but she said that lots of sort of S1 kind of fancied them. So she said to me, don't put age limits on your fiction, because there's so many different types of reader out there. And so I don't say it anymore. But yeah, they can see themselves. And I think I started a group called Bubble Tea Writers, and there's about 200 East and Southeast Asian writers from the UK in that group. I'd say about 100 of them sort of engage, and some of them just lurk about because they're not sure, you know, some people are quite shy in Facebook groups. But I know there's lots of people that have got agents now that are getting book deals, not just for young people, but for adults as well. There's Eva Wong Nava who writes everything. She's written middle grade, YA and picture books. There's Kimberly Pawley, who people don't really know is Asian. She's like Chinese American. There's Lucy Cop-Tandon, who's got picture books coming out. So there's a lot of people that are getting agents. It's just because publishing takes a long time. It's 2 or 3 years that we haven't heard those names yet. And one of my former mentees, Louis Sitt, has just got an agent, and I've read her middle grade, and she's a really good writer. So I hope, you know, that everybody gets book deals, but I think it is quite hard being an East and Southeast Asian, because when you get book deals, they look at the market, they look at readers. Oh, will they understand, say, a Filipino author? Candy Gourlay does very well, but she doesn't really write about British Filipinos, but she writes about Filipinos in the Philippines. There's Nina Aikimoto, who's British Japanese, and she has got an agent, Lydia Silva. She's going to be doing some really great stuff. She can draw as well. She can illustrate, and she'll be doing YA stuff. And Eliza Chan, who writes adult fantasy, again, it could be crossover, and she's got a book deal as well. So there's lots. I feel very hopeful about the future, because when I was published, even 2 years ago, there was basically me and Chung, and that was basically it. And people were comparing us. And whenever there was a book review of Danny Chung, they would mention her book as well, even though it's not the same audience. So I feel like there's going to be more people coming, having book deals, and I think that's brilliant. And I'm trying to support as much as I can.
Amazing. You heard it here first. I'm so glad we're recording so that we can go back and get all these recommendations.
These names, yeah, follow them on Twitter.
Yeah, and I love the kind of tactical librarianship as well, of like, don't tell them it's for this age group, don't tell, you know.
Yeah, which if a librarian hadn't told me, I wouldn't have known that. And so it's like, you know, I'm glad that she was like, felt that she could say, oh, you know, they wanted to read that book, but you put them off a bit. So, you know,
as long as they're reading, we're very
as long as they're reading, yeah.
And actually, I know that you mentioned there the illustrations, and I popped in the chat because I think I recognised When Our Worlds Collided. Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was at the YLG, have an annual Carnegie nominations party. And I was blown away by the beauty and how stunning these illustrations are. For your own books, what input do you have? Because again, in terms of representation, that must be, you know, something that needs a lot of thought and a lot of sensitivity, and hasn't regrettably always been the case. So how does that process unfold?
I've got all my book covers here. So with my novels, I get a little bit more say. So my Danny Chung, so this is by An Gao. She's Vietnamese illustrator, and this was her first book cover. So she doesn't normally do book covers, and she usually does like background for animation work. So she worked on a program called Dead End Paranormal Park, which on Netflix, it's an animation, and she's got quite whimsical style. And so when she sent me the illustrations for Danny Chung, Danny's head was a massive lollipop. It was quite a whimsical Danny Chung, and I showed my kids because I thought they're the age group that I want to read the book. I said, what do you think of Danny here? And they went, we don't like it, he looks weird. And so I was like, that's, if the kids are saying that, I'm going to go back and feed that back. And I wasn't convinced either. And so I sent her a photograph of some British Chinese boys and said, would you try and make him more realistic, like a real boy? A bit like, you know, like Pinocchio. Could you make it more of a real boy? And then she came up with this Danny, and I thought, yeah, he looks more real. And there were certain things, so I was like, can we have bingo balls on the cover? And can we have his trousers a bit too short because his parents don't have time to buy him new clothes? So just little details like that. So she's made his ankles show because his trousers are a bit too short because he's wearing quite old clothes. He's not that fashionable, but he's not geeky. So there was discussion about the David Walliams character Brian Wong, who's never ever wrong, how he's kind of geeky. He's kind of got squinty eyes. He's got a bow tie on. There's like math numbers, and so the whole kind of premise around Danny Chung was that it kind of debunks those stereotypes of British Chinese boys being geeks. You know, Danny is a bit mischievous. He wants to draw creatures. He's artistic. He draws his enemies. So, you know, I didn't want him to be kind of that geeky stereotype. And that's, my publishers actually chose a title for this one. And they were really good. So when I said, I don't like Danny Chung that she's done, do you mind if she tries something else? They were happy for that to change. My American cover is by Natal Kwek, who's based in London or Kent. She's a Malaysian, New Zealand illustrator, and she worked on The Little Mermaid with Anna Kemp. But she's brilliant, and I didn't have any feedback. I was just like, I love it. So she's got Danny's drawings here and the grandma, and we've got the grandma on the back as well, which I love because the book is about their relationship, really. That's the kind of the heart of the book. So I like the American covers that they've put the old people on the cover, because my American version of Lizzie Chu's coming out, and that's got the granddad on the cover as well. But I like both covers. They're just quite different styles, but both illustrators were brilliant to work with. You know, I keep in touch with them. And Lizzie Chu was illustrated by a Chinese American author, illustrator, who lives in Hawaii. So I didn't get to meet her. We didn't have much contact because there's no internal illustrations for this one. But I liked it. I like the abstract look of it, and I think a lot of middle grade covers look very similar, especially the fantasy ones. So I like that the characters don't look very childish. They're sort of, you know, they're 12 to 13. And I think that's why it does well for sort of upper school primary and also S1, S2 in Scotland, because it's, you know, the characters are 12 and they go on this road trip with the older brother, but, you know, they're a bit more mature than the kids in Danny Chung. So this one does feel a little bit older. And I was like, can she have a tuxedo on? And can she be wearing the Guanyin gown? And I wanted Lizzie to have short hair and it to be messy because she doesn't have time. So just these little clues about their lives, that she doesn't have time and she cuts her own hair, and that she's not a girly girl, that she wants to wear trousers. And it was a kind of a nod to her being a little bit tomboyish or non-binary, but I don't actually go into that. I just didn't want her to be a girly girl. And Tyler as well. He's a black character who's adopted, and one of his dads is a black scholar at Glasgow Uni who studies meteorites. So I wanted to just put different representation in the books, because you don't often see black scholars in middle grade. So yeah.
I love that idea of clues as well, because actually
little clues.
Even the trouser length or her little haircut, you know, I bet they're just reading it in the page and then looking at the cover. That's the way when I was little, you would have read it like that. Oh, they're gorgeous. And we're getting feedback on Twitter as well. I can see that people are feeling very hopeful about the future of children's and YA writing, thanks to you and everything that you're sharing. So thank you, Maisie. Does anyone else have questions? I'm conscious I'm hogging you slightly. Maybe Jen or Gillian, I know you're here, and feel free, guys, if you want to just come off mute for this last little bit, just put your hand up or come off mute, or you can keep adding to the chat.
Don't be shy.
Maybe
everyone's eating.
It's Jen again with the wonky
Hi,
screen,
Jen.
so I'm staying off. Can I ask the age-old question of, do you have anything new coming up that we can look forward to?
So I had a 3-book Tiger Warrior deal, so I'm writing 3 new books for the Tiger Warrior series, which is really fun. It's quite a nice it's nice to have a novel, because that's my own sort of marathon, and then it's nice to have the Tiger Warrior to have a bit of kind of light relief. You know, there's dragons in it, there's lasers and fighting. So I'm writing, I've written a paragraph of a new novel. I don't know what it's called yet, but it's going to be about a boy who is adopted by a family that's a different race to him, so transracially adopted. And I want him to meet a ghost of one of the Chinese Labour Corps from World War One. So it'll be contemporary, but he's going to meet this ghost from World War One, who's going to teach him about the Chinese Labour Corps in 1917 and 1918 that helped with the war effort, because again, it's a story we don't hear about. But through that journey, he's going to learn he's going to feel more connected to his Chinese roots from meeting this ghost. So that's kind of what I want to do. I wanted to challenge myself a little bit, and have a bit of magical realism in there, have a bit of historical stuff in there. So that's what I want to work on, but I need to do a bit more research on that. But yeah, haven't written it yet.
Sounds exciting. I'd love to hear that paragraph, but I guess that's the last thing a writer wants to hear when there's one paragraph in. Thank you. Also, we've got a question from Pamela as well. She's saying, great talk, Maisie, that she loved the library book at the beginning. Yes, that was so special. That she's always interested in writers' routines and habits. So I wonder if you could share some of yours. I was wondering actually if you write in the library ever, or how you approach it.
So I write sometimes at Mitchell Library. I have tried to write at Hillhead Library, but I find Mitchell Library, I don't know, there's something about it. I think places have sometimes got energy, which is conducive to writing, and I felt like Mitchell Library was really good to write in. I go to Waterstones by Earls Road a lot, so keep dancing Lizzie Chu. Even in the acknowledgements, I've said thank you to them, because I wrote a lot of this book in there. The dining table where I'm sat now, I use quite a lot when the kids are at school. I do find it, I don't really have a room of my own, which is a shame. So I go out to Waterstones or Mitchell Library to write. And usually my working day is quite funny. It's when the kids go to school and then I have to go and do the school run. And also if I've got like a novel deadline, I will book myself into a local hotel, like a cheap hotel, and just book 2 nights in there and just try and get like 10 to 15,000 words written. Because once you've got the first draft, then the editing is, you know, it's much easier because you feel like, oh, okay, I've got something to work with. I've got this piece of clay I can mold. But that first draft, sometimes it's like getting blood out of the stone. It's like, oh, it's not coming. And just getting out the house or going to an Airbnb really helps me. I don't have a writing routine like some writers where I will do 1,000 words every day. I write in big chunks. So I need kind of concentrated time where I'm like, okay, this is just what I'm working on. So I do like to get out of the house and go to hotels and just, yeah, because if I'm at home, I'll put the washing on, I'll put the dishwasher on, I'll just walk, I keep getting up and walking about. So yeah, getting out of the house is such a good thing for me. And yeah, sometimes retreats, but writing retreats are quite expensive. So I just find going to a hotel sometimes is what I need because it's just me, a hotel, my computer, might take my yoga mat. I go and buy some snacks and some food out, then come back, and that's, you know, I'm concentrated for 8 to 10 hours. So that's what I usually do.
Wow, amazing. That's a DIY writer's retreat.
DIY writing retreat.
Amazing. I'm glad to hear that the Mitchell Library appears as well. I think maybe it's the carpets. You just feel there is a history there. It's
nice.
Something special. And Gillian's asking a question about your writing as well, that have you ever had writer's block? And if so, how do you get over it?
Yeah, so I've had, writer's block, especially, you know, when I was had kids and then wanted to get back into it. I was like, I don't know what to write. Even with the novels, I might know kind of the seed of the idea, but then not know where to start. So I did do The Artist's Way when I moved to Glasgow, and that was really good. It's Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, and it's a book and it's kind of a workbook that you work through. So I did that from front to back, and I did the morning pages, and it was just kind of a bit like journaling. You just write whatever comes, and it's 3 pages every morning, and that by hand, that really got me sort of into a creative space and writing regularly. So I'd recommend that. Some of it's quite esoteric, so she kind of recommends going on an artist date, which I don't do enough of. I think I should do that more. So a few weeks ago, I went around Kelvin Grove Museum, which I never do by myself, and I was like, oh, this is really nice. Artist dates, the morning pages, and then sometimes what I do when I'm stuck is just do some other stuff. I'll watch romantic comedies, I'll go for walks, do yoga, talk to my friends, and it kind of releases that headspace and that pressure that you put on yourself to write something. And then when you come back, it's like, okay, I feel that I've decompressed and I can kind of focus again. So all of those things that are not writing, I do those, baking lemon drizzle cakes and stuff like that.
Very productive even when you're not writing. That's amazing. And I know a lot of our school and our youth librarians, they will support children, you know, they'll be doing creative writing with the kids and young people. So there's some great tips there, because I know that some can feel a wee bit reticent about the blank page. So it doesn't need to stay, bringing that inspiration in, it doesn't need to stay blank for long.
That's right.
So I think we've got time for one or two more questions if anyone has them. So please do raise your hands, pop them in the chat. Gillian's saying great ideas there. I think we'll be bringing them into our libraries as well. And actually, just on the topic of libraries, because it's clear that really at every stage of your life they have played such an important role as a reader and as a writer. And we unfortunately as a sector are really seeing the kind of threat of cuts again, that we've been through this before, but it's quite a challenging landscape out there. And there's this feeling that I don't think certainly all decision makers really realise the value of libraries and what they bring to individuals and communities. I mean, what's your take on it? Because I know that you've been a great support for CILIP's advocacy in the past. Why do you think libraries are so essential to us all?
I think it's not just the books. That's one part of it. I mean, when you go to Hillhead Library or a school library, they've got the recent books, they've got books that have been written in the last 5 years. And my primary school that my kids go, the primary school my kids go to, the books that she's brought home, I've had it, I mean, if you've seen my tweets about it, I've not been happy. Old books from 1935, books from 1956, books from 1999. Why are children having, reading those and not being given newer, relevant, diverse and inclusive books that librarians have read? I just don't understand it. And money's a big part of it, because I know the primary schools in Glasgow especially don't have any ring fence budget. I think it would help if parent councils got involved. They could fundraise for books, fundraise for things, but also take their kids to the library. So my primary school took us all to the library to get our library cards, and my school took us to the library as well as my parents. So that relationship with school and the community libraries, I think, is really important. It's a haven, it's a safe place. You can go and do your homework there after school. It's one of the free places that young people can go after school to hang out. There's not many places that young people have anymore, so I think it's really important to keep going. And librarians, when I do school visits and I'm sitting there waiting, I'm a bit too early, and I see kids come in and they go, "Oh, Miss, I've finished this book," and it's a football book. The librarian knows exactly what that kid can read next, and they're like, "Oh, you try this one," and the pupil takes it. And so librarians are that continuity. They're that person that knows that child and can recommend, "Oh, if you like this book, then you might like this book. If you like David Walliams, then how about this?" Parents don't have a clue. Even my mum's friends, they don't have a clue about books. And so librarians are the oracle, aren't they? They just know, they know what to recommend. And so I think it's really important, because there are kids out there that think reading's not for them. They think it's too hard, or the characters aren't relevant, or the stories aren't relevant. And actually it's the librarians that are like, "Hey, there's this book for you." That might be Barrington Stoke, or it might be a graphic novel, and they know and they can recommend. So I feel librarians and libraries are under attack, under threat, and under appreciated and valued, because that knowledge, parents don't have it at all, so us authors get very annoyed when there's people going to supermarkets and there's literally no choice, and it impacts us as well, because we don't make money that way either. It's not good for us. So it's terrible, and it's just really sad, isn't it, that it's happening?
Oh, but that's beautifully put, and the more people that thought like you, the better, Maisie. And the idea of librarians as an oracle is so special as well, because I've seen it myself. I mean, with both SLG and YLG, that link, that bridge between a child and a book, and that reading for pleasure, that just, as you say, that if you enjoyed this, you're going to enjoy this, and just seeing their eyes light up, because here's a book for them, and a book that's going to touch their heart and their mind alike. So, thank you. Does anyone else have any last minute questions? And then I'll hand over to you, Tanya, I think, for a very well-deserved vote of thanks. Lots of comments coming in, thanks. So Claire says, "Thank you for having painted such a full and colourful picture of your fascinating writing journey, Maisie. What a great story, and clearly you were destined to write." That's a good point. It's been a great session, and all-important shout out for all that librarians do. They do so much to get children excited about reading. So saying thank you all. Thank you for coming, Claire, and very well put. I think if we don't have any more questions, I'll hand over to you, Tanya. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Maisie. That was amazing. I always find it quite emotional when writers talk about how important libraries and school libraries and reading and books are to them. When we're all having bad days in school.
It's a haven, isn't it? It's somewhere you can go that's quiet. And
it's not just about the books.
It's not about learning either. You can pick up a book for
Absolutely.
you that your teacher doesn't need to know about.
Yeah, and I love that you write about older characters as well, because I always find when you're building relationships with pupils, some of the most difficult pupils that won't talk to you about anything else, hate reading, never going to read a book, will sit and talk about their granny and how much they love them. And it's always a good way. So I love that you've got older characters in your books. and how you've used your life experiences in your writing. It's just fantastic. And we thank you so much for your support for libraries at this difficult time for a lot of us, and how your books are helping to raise empathy and understanding and let kids see themselves in books, which is just so important and something that we try, and as you say, hand the right book to the right child at the time that they need it. I was laughing to myself about your reading journey at school, where you skipped from junior books to the young adult stuff, or even the adult stuff that you probably shouldn't have been reading at that time. I was the same. Lots of Judy Krantz, I think it was, that wrote some of those books you were speaking about. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for getting your sex education from adult fiction that you shouldn't have been reading an S for. Luckily, it's not like that nowadays.
No.
But thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's so lovely to meet you and hear about your writing. And thanks to all of you for coming. It is difficult at this time of year to work late and to stay behind at school or to go home and log on to Zoom. So thank you very much. It's always good to see everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And good luck with your next books, Maisie.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your support as well.